So welcome to Worm Composting in the Classroom. I am Recycle Rhonda. For those of you who do not know me, I did look at the registration, so I know many of you and have either chatted with you via email, but most of you I have worked with in the past. And so I do all of the school outreach for Chittenden Solid Waste District. Chittenden Solid Waste District is, encompasses basically we manage and try to find fun and fantastical things to do with all the stuff that people in Chittenden County don't want or need anymore. And so that's basically what we're tasked with. And I am joined tonight by my co-worker, Ethan. Have at it, my friend.
I'm Ethan Hausman. I do business outreach for CSWD. I'm very excited to be joining you tonight, and I will be the person on the other side of the Q&A. So we encourage you to engage through the Q&A, comments, questions, what have you, and I'll make sure that Rhonda sees those since she's going to have her hands full in the worms.
Yeah. So I forgot to drag a bunch of those out. That was silly of me, but we can grab them in a bit. All right. So yeah, again, use the Q&A. Feel free to use it all the way through. We're going to do a few little slides to start off with, and then just kind of going over the biology and whatnot of worms. And then we'll turn it back to live, and then I'll show you a live demo of how to set up a pretty simple worm composting bin in your classroom or at home if you so choose to do that one. All right. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time if the slides are not clear because my internet is not very good. And I realize that evening webinars is when I guess everybody's hopping on the old internets. And so my apologies if it's not clear. All right.
We're getting your preview screen, Rhonda.
Oh, holy bananas. Well, that's not good, is it? Well, that is weird. How about, is that better?
That's what we're looking for. Excellent.
I know you guys are all well-schooled in technical glitches, I'm sure by now. All right, so again, this is like my contact information. I didn't put my email on there, but that's okay. You'll get that. Most of you have it anyway. All right, so a little bit about the agenda. We're gonna go through the overview of worm composting, a little bit about worm biology, some general worm bin setup tips and tricks, and then we'll open it back up for a live demo on how to set up your bin. And then during all of this, again, feel free to throw in questions or comments because Ethan will be the wingman on that for this evening. All right. So worm composting or vermicomposting is basically just using worms to take your fruits and veg and turn it into something fantastical that your plants can then use for vitamins and nutrients and helps them stay healthy throughout the summer. It also helps water stay in the ground. The garden that you're seeing in this picture actually is something I call the giving garden. I think I planted maybe 3 things in there, but basically took a plot of garden and threw in worm compost that I had made, or the worms had made all winter long, and that is what grew. So I probably had, I ended up having like 47 tomato plants last year, and none of which I planted at all. They all came from the worm compost because the worms, it doesn't get hot enough and the worms don't eat the seeds. So they are in this nutrient rich environment and those seeds just start popping up. It's pretty, I was like weeding tomatoes. It was crazy. So some of the reasons that I think worm bins rock is, well, they're super fun. They're cheap and easy to set up. Like I said, you get amazing volunteer plants. So not just tomatoes, but I've got melons out of it, got some odd squashes because they hybridize, but some weird squashes over the years too. But it's just fun to put them in like a giving garden. And then everything in the giving garden, you don't have to do the giving garden, obviously, but everything in the giving garden is then I take to the Williston Food Shelf and donate it for people. But it's the least I could do. But the worms are doing all the work. I'm not really doing much at all. It helps reduce, fight climate change, keeps foods out of the landfill. And for you guys especially, it's an indoor living laboratory, which is pretty awesome. We'll go into a few things that I think that you guys might find fun to do with your students. All right, worms, worms, worms. There are a lot of worms. Vermont has 19 species of earthworms, none of which are native earthworms, because all of our native earthworms got wiped out during the last ice age. So they are all introduced species. Some of the earthworms that are found in Vermont cause some pretty have some very bad effects in our forested situations. In your garden, they're fine and dandy. They do provide aeration to the soil, and especially like the night crawlers. However, in a forested situation, they actually like kind of eat up all of the understory or eat up all of the nutrients that the understory needs to break out and grow. And so you can definitely see differences where earthworms are and where earthworms are not, because the understory in that forested where they're not is very thick, and it's fascinating. So I would recommend checking out UVM's. I'll send a link to that, actually. It's a paper on earthworms. It's very fascinating. They do a lot of studies on of the invasive earthworms or non-natives. We're talking about composting worms tonight. They are very different than your night crawlers. So they don't live deep down into the earth. They live right underneath the leaf litter, probably not further down than the 6 inches. These are just a couple of the different types of composting worms. We're going to be focusing on the red wigglers, Icenia fetida to be exact. That's the worm I use. But even when you get Icenia fetida or you order them from a worm farmer, you're probably getting some of those Icenia andres as well. They're hard to tell apart. You might even get some of those blue worms in there too. It just depends. 3 different basic types of earthworms. So we've got the epigeic, which is what we're talking about, the Icenia fetida that live no more than probably 6 inches into the soil, but mostly right underneath the leaves. You might find these guys actually hanging out in your compost pile if it isn't a particularly like cold winter. They might go to the center of your compost pile outside and survive. Brewster Pierce Memorial School, we uncovered their compost pile, and in the center there was like a bunch of red wigglers that were in there because one of the teachers dumped the worm bin in there in the summer, thinking that it would be fine, but they do not live. So composting worms will not survive typically our winters here in Vermont, but they are found. They're just not found a lot in the wild here. And then you got like the endogeic, which is the medium, and then you got the night crawlers, which is the anisic. And those guys right now are probably about 6 feet into the soil and hanging out down below our feet and waiting for the first signs of spring, which I am too. I do have to say these pictures of the worms, though, are not the actual species that are listed. I just put in some species that are found in Vermont, and then I realized, oh, they don't match the pictures. So my apologies. I wasn't trying to like get one over on you. A little bit about internal anatomy of the worm. Some things that I love to point out to kids, like I always get there, you know, what do you guys know about worms, or what do you think you know about worms? And some of them are very fascinating facts, and some of them are not facts, but things that they've been told. But one of the things that they love to learn, especially like K5s, are like that they have 5 hearts. And in really young worms and like newborn worms, and if you put them underneath like a light scope or a dissecting scope, you can actually see the 5 hearts in there because their skin is so thin. So that's kind of cool. I like to point out the clitellum, or I call it the saddle because clitellum sounds crazy, but that is where new baby worms come from. Also pointing out that worms are hermaphroditic, and that might be for the older kids, but they are both male and female, which in my opinion, my hypothesis anyway, is the reason that we think that if you cut a worm in half that both halves live, but they do not, because you can't like cut the heart off from the back end and expect it to live. So I usually address that when I'm teaching the kids about worms, because I learned that you can cut them in half and they would live, but in fact, they will not live. So this is just, oh, and then the little hairs on them, which is always cool because this is like how the worm senses like where it's around, because obviously it has no eyes, but it also picks up the scent of food using the setae or the little hairs, and they move where the food is. So that's important to know when setting up your worm bin. So you don't have to be like, oh, where are the worms? We put the food there. They're going to go where the food is based on the chemicals that they're picking up on those setae, which is kind of cool. Little life cycle of the worm. So they are actually, and I didn't know this until like, I mean, I've been worm composting for a long time, but I didn't really like study the biology of them or the life cycle, but they are born in these like little, oh, let me get out this little laser pointer thing. I forgot about this. So they're born in like in the cocoon. So they make, each worm will make babies because of them being male and female. So they just kind of match up the parts, exchange their information, and then on to making cocoons. So that saddle or that clitellum sloughs off their body and forms this little, like, it's lemon shaped. And you can see over here on the right-hand side, that's an actual cocoon that I took a picture of through a microscope. And then that's the size of it right there. This one has already been hatched and it's looking a little brown, but they're usually like lemon color, like bright yellow and very small. Once you get an eye for them, they're easy to pick out, but it's a fun challenge for kids to go find some cocoons. So in about 60 days or so 2 months, you'll have a mature worm that will then find other worms, and and then you're off and running with a worm farm. It is fantastic ecosystem, and not only the worms will live in there, but you will find a lot of other critters. They are working in conjunction with bacteria, especially bacteria, but fungi too. Mold is not a bad decomposer. They'll all work together, and the worms will not only eat the food scraps that you put in there, but they'll actually eat those microbes as well. And what happens is the compost is the process is pretty cool because it goes through their digestive tract. And those microbes, that community of microbes actually increases as it moves through the worm gut. And so the worm compost or the worm poop is like super high in microbial activity. And the nutrients that are in worm compost are like readily available for plant uptake. So you get your nitrates and nitrites all ready to go and your phosphates and all that. There's no conversion needed. So once you put it in your soil, those plants can automatically start, sucking up those nutrients. On the left over here is actually from my worm bin too. And it's actually 2 worms that were mating. I just happened to be digging around in there one day and I was like, whoa, that's pretty crazy. That's a really long worm. But it wasn't. It was 2 worms that were in the midst of mating. And actually, you can kind of see, like, here is where the cocoon is forming, and it'll like slough right off the body and make this like cool little cocoon over here. So that's just some basic biology. Questions?
It's been pretty quiet on the question front. We have Lee is interested.
Shy.
Interested in knowing more about the easiest and most effective way to harvest the vermicompost, which
we're gonna get.
We haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, we'll get to that when we get to the bin building. But all right, so we'll dive right into the materials that you'll need. So you'll need a worm bin, pretty cheap. You can get a 10-gallon bin at like at Home Depot for $7, like $7.80 or something like that. But you can basically use anything you want. You'll need food. So fruits and vegetables are the best option, especially in like classroom snacks. Water, you'll need bedding, which shredded newspaper, paper towels, leaves, anything really like the brown stuff that you would put in a normal backyard composting will work great for bedding. A bucket so that you can put your water and soak your paper, your worms, and of course, love and respect. Worm bins come in many shapes and sizes. I think this is a great opportunity for you guys to test some engineering skills of your students. I was teaching 10th grade biology at BFA in St. Albans years ago, and I had 2 students that weren't typically involved with school or that thrilled with being in school, but they really got into building a worm farm. But theirs was for night crawlers. but they got it really into the engineering part of it, and they made it like glass or plexiglass on both sides. And it was pretty awesome to watch them be that engaged. But so this could be an engineering opportunity. But you can see they range in like homemade. This is like a marine battery box. I've got one worm guy here in Vermont that I chat with that loves using these for his worms. This was one of the first worm bins that I had personally. Just these were like little 5-gallon bins. These are the 10-gallon ones. You can get elaborate. You can go manufactured, like over on the right-hand side, you can go manufactured. I just got this bad boy. It's the Urban Worm Bag. I'll show you it. I'm very excited. It's from my buddy Steve in Philadelphia. But I typically try to reuse what I can around the house, but you can reuse anything too. So you don't have to go out and buy anything. You could even go and adventure in the custodial closet and see what's hanging out there and what you guys could use for a worm bin. You can use a 5-gallon bucket, as a matter of fact.
We have a question about that, Rhonda.
Yeah.
So, and would an old sheetrock bucket work?
Yes, that would be fine. You don't need depth with these guys, but it would be easy to like build out your operation and make, and I'll talk about this further, and make like these multiple tray ones. So like this one's got a couple of different bins so the worms can migrate. It makes harvesting your compost a whole lot easier. And this one's like, you can't really tell in this picture, but it's got a couple different trays, but you can definitely use it, but you're not going to want to make it any deeper than 6 inches because they're not going to move that deep into it. But you can keep feeding the top and they'll just keep moving up to the food. So eventually you have a 5-gallon bucket full of food, full of worm compost, and then you can just scoop off the worms and throw them in the next bucket. So that would definitely work. Just make sure that all of your, all of the stuff that's was once in there is out. I've used old paint buckets too that have been scrubbed clean, latex paint buckets from Local Color. All right, so what do they eat? Well, again, they'll eat pretty much any fruit and vegetable that's raw, which is why I think it makes it a great classroom snack kind of way to get rid of your classroom snacks and make something useful either for your classroom plants or your school garden. So I just kind of broke it up into a couple of different things like main courses, snacks being things that they can have occasionally, but I wouldn't feed them a lot. And again, it depends on how many worms you start off with. The bedding, again, there is a wide range of things that you can use as bedding. This also serves as food because they will eat the newspaper and the paper towels and the leaves. They'll compost anything, any of the bedding material that's listed here. And then some no-nos, citrus peels, oily foods, meats, dairies. The citrus peels, 2 things, it'll drop the pH if you have a lot. And I know like working like with schools and you guys have like, 20 kids eating oranges, putting all of that into a worm bin and then having maybe like a half a pound of worms isn't really going to work because one, it'll drop the acidity in there and the worms don't necessarily like that. But citrus peels have a lot of oil in them, limonene oil. And it can, as they start breaking down, it can coat the worms and suffocate them because they, like frogs and salamanders, breathe through their skin. And we want to keep them nice and clean and delightful.
Rhonda, can I ask you about coffee filters?
Yeah,
coffee filters
are
okay?
Great. Yep, paper coffee filters are fantastical. And the coffee grounds as well. Yep, pop it all in there. Yep. Onions, some of them will eat them. I have weird worms. My work worms don't like cabbage, but my home worms love cabbage. And I think it's because I eat a lot of cabbage at home, but they don't necessarily, the work ones don't see it. Now they're all like communally living since I had to move everything out of my office and move my office home. Everybody's living together. So I don't know if they're just learning to like cabbage or just my home worms were eating it all. Onions are similar. I don't feed onions to them because they don't necessarily like them. They will break down, but they take a while to break down and they tend to be kind of sulfury smelling. So I avoid them in my worm bin, but it's not that they're bad. It's just to avoid smelliness. Big one here is the glossy, shiny paper. It's not good for them. And depending on what's used to make them glossy and shiny, I just don't mess around with it in my own worm bin. And I have been told by many worm more experienced worm people to not put glossy and shiny paper in there, like your coupons and things like that. So don't put that shiny stuff in there, or magazines. Troubleshooting, there is going to be troubles. Everybody runs into them. Worm death, it could be too hot, too cold, too acidic, or even too alkaline, and it just mess around with it. They're not all going to die off in one fell swoop unless it gets like 100 degrees. They do like they're like 60 to 75. They're more like Mediterranean worms. I think that's actually where they're native to. So they like 60 to 75 degrees. They will start escaping if it gets too hot. They will definitely start crawling out. If it gets too dry, which I've seen at schools many times, and I've had teachers call me at 6:30 in the morning, like, oh my God, I walked into the classroom and my worms were all over the floor and they're dried, and I'm sweeping them up before the kids come in. I'm just going to tell them that they went on vacation. That will happen if it's too dry, because they need that moisture in order to breathe. So you want to make sure that your worm bin is always on the moist side. And I'll go over this when we build the bin because it's easier to show you.
We had a question, Rhonda, about troubleshooting.
Yeah, great.
Kyle asks about the Worm Factory 360 and says that he's tried unsuccessfully twice to get worms going in my classroom. Both time I got lots of flies and the worms kept leaving en masse, despite me keeping a light on the bins. Should I ditch the worm tower, or is it human error?
I would say that they just weren't happy in the environment they were provided. So I've used a Worm Factory 360. That's what was here when I got to CSWD. That's what they had. And I've acquired like 3 or 4 of them over the years that people donated, which I've doled out to schools too. I think it sounds like either it's too dry, or there's just not enough of that bedding in there to keep them in there. I've not had them actually like leave the Worm 360. I've had no worm escapes personally, but I have seen it in schools with the Worm 360 as well, the factory, the Worm Factory thing. And it typically, when I went to look at the situation, it was because it was like bone dry and they were like trying to run away. I'm not saying that was what was going on with you. But it was pretty dry in there. And that's why something environmentally is not working for them. And that's why they're leaving. Might also be too hot if you overfeed it and it heats up. Because again, it's not just the worms in there. Whoops, wrong one. Not just the worms in there, but those the microbes, the bacteria, and the fungi are going to heat everything up as well. And so if it gets like 90 degrees, they might want to like get out of there and try to find a cooler situation. And they don't know what's outside of it, out of their own little environment. But we can talk further too about that if you want to. You can either give me a ring or send me an email, Kyle, and we can talk a little further about your particular situation, because that's what I'm here for. I like to help solve the worm wrangling problems. So in the classroom, for those of you that I have worked with, which plenty of you on here I have, I do Worms Alive as one of the lessons that I offer to come to schools, and hopefully I'll be able to do that soon because I miss everybody very much. So worm exploration is like one of my most gratifying moments is to see the kids like exploring worms, especially ones that were like, ew, gross, I'm not going to touch it. And by the end, they're like up to their elbows in worm dirt. So that's always fun. And it's not just for the elementary school kids. My 10th grade students that were working on that worm project spent probably about 20 minutes not saying a word, just like watching the worm and like looking at a diagram of its musculature and trying to figure out like where the muscles were and how it was moving. And again, these weren't kids that were like enthusiastic about being in school. So it was pretty rewarding. So I think across the grade levels, this is fun. So you'll get a follow-up email from me in 2 days. So 6 o'clock on Saturday. I'm going to put in there a link to my resource folder. It'll have all of this stuff in it that I'm going to talk about. So the worm exploration sheet will be in there. There's one for smaller kids for like basically K through 2, and then like 3rd grade and up. forgive me because I was not trained to teach elementary school. So I don't even know like what age they start reading or like I know what age they start reading, but at what levels they read. So, you know, choose the sheet that works best for you. That's all I'm going to say. I'm a high school teacher. And so hopefully most of the kids that I was teaching can read. One of the things that I think is fun, and one of the things that I am like so sad that I'm not a classroom teacher anymore, is doing like experiments. Because for those of you who don't know, like I am a scientist by training, and so experiments are like my favorite thing to do. So effects of compost on plant growth experiment is cool, and I think this would be really cool for all grade levels as well. And it covers a lot of different standards as well. And so you can get in like some measuring, some data collection, graph making, all sorts of stuff with just this one experiment. I did have pictures of my own growth experiment. However, I couldn't seem to find them anywhere. And I don't know if I accidentally deleted them or what happened to them. But these are just taken from two different, one is from NC State and one is from Redworm Composting, as you can see. But it's pretty cool to see the difference in compost. And I typically run an experiment with your control, like plain old soil, backyard compost, Green Mountain compost, and worm compost at two different concentrations. And that's what my old experiment was about. And I had pictures and now I don't know what happened to them. So my apologies. But you can see at the NC State, like the differences just even in the concentrations of the vermicompost. So I think that would be fun to show the kids that nutrients do matter and plants do need food to survive and not just sunlight. So I'm just going to end all of this so I can get back to this here. So I know that was really quick, but I just wanted to save enough time for us to cover the hands-on demo of building the worm bin. I did want to show you, though, I do have an experiment going right now with worm tea, because I'm going to do a webinar in March on how to make worm tea and use it and the benefits of it. And I'm doing lots of research on it. But I did want to share this, and it was hard for Ethan to see it earlier. But so these are my 2 pots here, and they had 5 pea seeds in each one. And this one is, you can see the little green coming up there. They're still young. I just planted them not that long ago. But this one is already sprouted. And this one that is just being watered with plain water has not yet. So fingers crossed that this, that my hypothesis is proven correct. And worm tea is more nutritional than just feeding them water. So we'll see how that pans out. And you can join me on, I think it's March 13th. For worm tea compost or worm tea usage, if you want. All right, so we're going to jump right in. Are there any questions that
we got a few you might want to take now? A couple. Do you need to shred paper towels?
Yes, you want to make sure that you're shredding up all of the paper that you put in there. Just because it creates more area for them to move around. If you put in just like flat, non-shredded paper towels, sometimes they get pretty compact in there and the worms will make their way through, but these worms are not very strong. They're not big and long. They are tiny. I'm going to run over here and see if I can't grab a handful of them. Sorry, I should have thought about this earlier, but I didn't. All right, so let me just throw them out on the table here. So you can see, I'm going to get it up here as close as I can. And it might not focus quite well enough. I guess not. But that's like an adult worm on my finger there. And so they're really small and they don't have very strong bodies to kind of like wiggle around deep into the earth, which is why they typically stay right on the top fluffy layer of soil. So I always shred it up. It is a great release as well for frustration. To shred paper, and it's like the one thing that the kids love to do the most when we're building worm bins is learn how to shred paper. So it is a great, if you need to like release like 5 minutes of like pent up energy in the classroom, just hand them like stacks of newspaper or paper towels and just have them shredded up. And I keep mine in like a big bin so that I don't have to shred it up every time I go to like feed my worms. All right, is that
going back a bit? Sharon says, love that idea, asking the children to come up with an idea, suggestions for materials, shoebox, etc.
All right, yeah, I I mean, a shoebox, you start with anything really. I mean, like, so in the worm guide that you guys will get a link to as well, that'll be in the resource folder that I send you a link to. The worm guide has in there, and the worm composting lesson that I created for you guys as well has like how much, so the kids can figure out how much food scraps are edible, worm friendly food scraps are being produced in the classroom a week. And then from there, they can like figure out the math on, I mean, not the kindergartners, but with help, you know, we can get there. They can figure out like what size bin they need. But yeah, just like a little handful. And I am happy to supply you with a handful of worms. I mean, I have a fair amount, so I am happy to share the worms. Because right now, I just learned this, that the worms are like 2 to 3 times more expensive right now because like when the pandemic hit, everybody was like, oh, let me get into growing a garden. And so we sell it at Green Mountain Compost. We sold almost twice as much compost last year than we have ever in history. So I guess the worm farmers were feeling the pressure as well. So they are quite expensive right now. So if you want to start with just a handful, I can definitely spare a handful for you guys. I can't give you like a whole pound, but if you start with a little handful, a shoebox would be perfect for that. That would be great. It might start breaking down though, because it's paper and it's going to be a moist environment or a very damp environment. But again, experiment. I had one teacher, I don't know if Suzanne's on here, but she had like a small bin. When I first met her, she had like a little teeny bin. So, and it worked out fine, for the most part, Suzanne. So yeah, I mean, you can use anything that you have laying around. So we're gonna like work with this, which is like just, I got a 10-gallon like storage container, but you can use like, so this also is just like an old drawer from one of those like plastic shelving things or plastic drawer set, but you could use this. You could have the kids paint the sides and you know, and then you can just like lay like bubble wrap lightly on the top just to keep the moisture in so it doesn't dry out as much. But again, those worms are going to stay out of sight. They're going to go down away from the light. So you can use anything that you've got laying around. And I would love to see what the kids come up with if you do go pursue this route, because I'm always looking for what ends up. So basically, you need a bin, you need a drill with, if you're starting from scratch, with a quarter-inch drill bit. You can use a 1/2-inch drill bit as well, or you can use like one of these like fancy spade bit things that I just discovered, and I really like them, but this one's super dull, so I'm not going to use it. You need newspaper, you need a bucket with some water in it, some sandpaper, some regular paper for the bedding, worms and food. Boom. If you've got all of that, you're well on your way to making a worm bin. All right, so this one, I ran out of worm bins, so this one I did start already, and I keep using it as a demonstration bin. At some point, I think I'm gonna have to go get a fresh bin and start all over. But you're gonna basically drill holes all the way around the top. And again, it doesn't matter. You can use like the spade bit, make them large. You can make them the 1/4-inch, but you just want to go all the way around the top, and it's easy peasy. You just get your drill, and you want to take it easy, especially on these plastic ones. Some of them are brittle and some of them are a little more flexible, depending on the type of plastic they're made out of. So don't like, you know, don't show off your guns and like jam the drill in there. Let the drill do the work for you. I only say this from experience. So basically, you're just going to go in and, all right, a drill all the way around the sides so that you have some air circulation in there. Now, the worms are getting most of their oxygen from the moisture in the water, However, you still want circulation in there because the other microbes, they're going to need that oxygen as well. And everybody's working as a team. You are creating a cool little ecosystem right here. And you might find that there's all sorts of things living in there. So you might find like white worms or white pot worms in there, which those are fine. If the acidity drops like 6 or, probably like 5 or 6 pH, you'll see these red little dots in there. They look like sesame seeds, but they're mites. And so they like really moist, acidic environments. They're not harmful to the worms, but they will eat the worm food. And so you can just mix in some paper and kind of level that pH out a bit, and then they'll just kind of go away, which is kind of cool. But anyway, so you want to drill your holes all the way around. Now, when you're drilling in this plastic, it does make it a little snaggy in here. Now the worms, yeah, they can escape from these holes, but the idea is to keep them happy inside the bin so they don't escape. But if you're like me, I like to like get my hands all up in there and dirty. And sometimes the snags on the inside has like cut the back of my hand. So I like to just take a bit of sandpaper. So you can use either these little sand blocks, which I'm not exactly sure what they're for, but they're really convenient for doing worm bins. Or you can just use plain old sandpaper. And I don't know why this one's like bright purple, but whatever. And then you can just go along, sand down those rough edges so that your paws don't get hurt if you're sticking it in there, or the kids. And then you can go around and do the outside. So it just takes off those snaggles a bit. So you're gonna have some plastic left over. I would say do this indoors. I have done it outside, but you want to put a tarp down, because when you're drilling the holes, you're gonna make these teeny tiny little bits of plastic. And as we all are aware, Earth's got enough plastic issues, let's not contribute. So I've started just doing this totally indoors so that I can keep it and just like vacuum up the pieces that are flying out, and then dump the rest into the trash can. So you wanna make sure you get those plastic bits out of there, give it a little wipe, maybe a wipe down with a cloth or something, and then your bin is basically ready to get started. First thing we wanna do is make a nice fluffy bed for the worms. You can again use paper towels. You can use 7 days, or the newspaper that comes in the mail. And again, I shred it up. I keep a big bin of shredded paper all ready to go. And you can do this in your classroom. Key to shredding paper, though, is you want to shred from the jig-jaggedy edge down. So you can shred like this direction and then like fluff it up and put it in there. If you shred from the other direction, it makes like chunky monkeys like that. And that's not really going to be useful because you won't be able to fluff that up and allow the movement of the worms. So look for the jig-jag edge and then just tear down. Or let the kids figure it out on their own, which I like to do if I have time. I like to just give them the paper, and then like they'll start looking at each other like, why are you getting strips and I'm getting chunks? And have them figure it out for themselves. Let the light bulbs go off. So once you have your shredded paper, you're gonna do probably about, for a bin, this is a 10-gallon storage container. You're gonna probably want at least 20 pieces of paper, but you will be able to gauge that. For when you're choosing a bin, you want the most surface area possible. You don't need it super deep. Again, they're not gonna go over 6 inches deep. So you want a big surface area as opposed to depth for the composting worms, at least. Even like one of those like under the bed sweater boxes, I bet you those things would be pretty awesome. You might have to harvest more often, but big surface area, that would be pretty cool to experiment with. But shred up the paper.
And Rhonda.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say that Kristen notes that she had great success with 2-liter bottles that are clear so kids could see them easily. At the time, my main bin had done so well that worms had reproduced prolifically. 60 pairs of kids are able to get a dozen worms for their own 2-liter bottle and observation. Pretty cool.
Oh, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, okay, so that would work too. That would be really cool to have your own like little worm thing. Oh, I just was thinking too, I'm sitting on like lots of these like tennis ball canisters that I'm always looking for homes for because they can't be recycled because of that metal ring around the top. So if you want to do something like that, shoot me an email. I'm happy to drop off tennis ball canisters for you that are clear see-through and with a red top. So that would work out, and we would be reusing something that would typically have to go into the trash. Oh man, great. Thanks for letting my light bulbs go off. All right, so shred up your paper. You're gonna get a bucket. I am reusing a local color bucket here. fill it with, well, you don't have to fill it, halfway with water, and stick your shredded paper in there. You want the paper to sit in there or soak for at least 10 minutes. I typically let mine soak overnight, because the more water that the paper soaks in, the less dry your bin's going to be and the happier your worms are going to be. So this has been soaking for maybe about 3 hours now. So you're not going to like pick it up and put it in all wet. Although worms do definitely need moisture, they will drown. So you don't want standing water in there. So just kind of squeeze it out. This is another fun task for children. They love this part too. So in the summer, I do camps. So they're able to do this. I don't usually do this in the classroom or let them do it in the classroom, but at camps I do because we're outside. So you just want to squeeze it out, and you want it basically as damp as a wet sponge. And then you're just going to fluff this bad boy up like this and make it nice and fluffy because, well, like me, I like a fluffy bed and not a hard compact bed. Although I don't think I'd want mine this wet, but. So you're going to have enough paper to cover the bottom, maybe 1 inch or 2 deep. It doesn't really matter, but you want it at least to cover the bottom of your bin. And then you're ready to like add your worms. And then you can put food in it. Worms, they take some time to acclimate, but it's all good. You can put some food in there. After you add your food, I always add a little bit of soil, because in like a teaspoon of soil is like, billions of bacteria. So they will kickstart the old compost process in there and help break that food down into smaller pieces. Speaking of food, make sure that your food is cut into smaller pieces. All right. Fruit flies tend to they usually come in our fruit anyway. However, if you break it down to smaller pieces, the faster those microbes and the worms can get to it to compost it down, and the less likely that you will have issues with fruit flies. When I do get calls from schools or even just people from the public who are having fruit fly issues in their worm bins, I go look at it, and typically it's like, oh, here's a whole banana, and here's like a whole apple, or giant eggshells or something of that nature where it hasn't been chopped up. For the little Kit Kats, like pre-Ks, Kid Logic in South Burlington, they have like a whole like worm crew of kids that, we're talking 4 and 5-year-olds here, that it's their duty to check on the worm bin every day and make sure that they are nice and damp in there. And if they're not, they get out their old spray bottle and spray them down to make sure that the worms are nice and, in a nice moist environment. And then they collect all of their food all week, their snacks all week long in like a yogurt cup or a yogurt container, or like one of those big sour cream ones work well too. And then they get out their scissors and they just start cutting up like the banana peels and the apple cores with scissors. And they get very excited about it. And they were very excited to show me that they were like on the worm crew. So they switch it up for tasks that they're responsible for the week. But their worm bin is doing great. And a lot of their teachers, when I went and taught the teachers how to worm compost, they were like, some of them were like, oh no, man, I'm not doing this worm thing. And then when I went back to check on them like 5 or 6 months later, most of them, there was still one that was like, I'm still not touching those things. But most of them were like, actually, they're not that bad. And so they had great success at their pre-K. And so I think that everybody can be successful if we work as a community to answer each other's questions. Worms, food, chop it up. If you want, go to, sometimes I get lazy and I get like a lot of like old, somebody just dropped off a whole bunch of squashes that were like starting to like mold and stuff. So I just stuck those in the food processor and zapped them up and chopped them into teeny tiny pieces and then stuck them in like in a container in my fridge until I was ready to like feed the worms. So you could get like a blender at Resource or Restore for $1 or $1.50, put that in the classroom and dump those things in it and just zip it up. And then you're ready to go and it's all chopped up into small pieces. Or you can make it a classroom task and have them cut it up with scissors. Either way, cut the food into tinier pieces. And then you will hopefully avoid the fruit flies. I've never had a fruit fly issue. I'm not bragging, I just have never had it, but I've always cut my worm food up. And it might be overkill, but I like not having fruit flies too. So once you add the worms and the food, a little sprinkle, I call it worm food seasoning. a little sprinkle of soil. And I do this every time I feed. I feed once a week because it makes it easier and it gives them like the whole week to like work on that food and break it all down. And so then you want to cover them up again with another at least 2-inch layer. So you want to make sure it's a nice thick layer of paper, no matter what, or leaves, whichever you're using, whatever your bedding part is, and then fluff that up and then lay that over the top of that. And again, 2 inches or more is really critical because that will, one, keep the fruit flies down, keep the smell out, and it'll keep them moist for a longer period of time, and you probably won't have to check on them as much. And as time goes on, you'll see, oh, okay, that's keeping in the moisture, and they'll be nice and happy in there. Last year, I set somebody up at Hiawatha. I set somebody up. They were worm composting at Hiawatha? Yeah, it was Hiawatha. And then, yeah, it was last year. Well, the year before last. Sorry, I am like stuck in time here, but year before last. And then in, I want to say it was like August of 2020, she was like, we just can't deal with the worm bin right now. Can I drop it off? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So she came and dropped it off. In a year's time, their classroom had produced like 35 pounds of, their worms have produced 35 pounds of worm compost just from their classroom snacks. And we had to like go to a second bin system, which leads me into my next thing. So for harvesting, I find it easiest to just kind of build a vertical system, if you will. So when you're at the store, if you're going to go buy a bin like this, make sure you buy 2 or 3 of these at the same size. But you can do it again with the 5-gallon buckets. You can do this the same way. So you take a second one, you drill holes in the bottom. All right. Again, 1/4-inch holes are just perfectly fine. And then when your worms, like when you're like, whoa, I've got like 6 inches of worm compost in my bottom tray and you're ready to harvest it, you can just sit this right on top of that compost that's in there and then just start all over in this tray. And guess what? The worms will use those little setae, the little hairs, and like be like, woo, where, well, I'm doing antenna, but that you get the drift. And know where the food is, and then they'll crawl up to the food into the second tray, and then you are left with less worm full of compost. Now, it'll take like a month for them to migrate, at least a month, sometimes 2 months. I like to feed them watermelon and cantaloupe, which seems to be all worms' favorite food, because then they tend to move a lot faster out of that bottom tray or out of the tray you want to harvest. And so that, again, you could do this with 5-gallon buckets. I've had a school that did it with, they had 3 5-gallon buckets, but they probably are only, you know, like 6 inches to a foot deep, and they drilled holes in the bottom, and then the worms would just move up and down through wherever the food was at. So that is a way to harvest it. I find it the easiest way to harvest. And again, there will still be worms lurking in your compost. So you either are going to sacrifice them, or you can sit and pick through them. And do it that way. I tend to have like a whole nother container that I leave my compost in to finish. So there's going to be cocoons and stuff in there too. So I like to get as many worms out as possible. And then I just scoop the first like 2 inches of that compost and put it back in my system and then use that for my garden, if that makes sense. If you're not going to go vertical and you just want to stick to one bin, then what you can do is, so once you've got a pretty good amount and you don't want it too full. So again, if you're getting up to like 6 inches or so in the bin of compost, it's not super healthy that they live in their own compost either. So keep in mind, it's worm poop. And that might be one of the reasons why they try to escape too, like, oh gosh, all right, this is becoming too much for me. I need to get out of here. But you can feed one side of the bin, all right? So you're just gonna put everything on one side. So you'd put your food on there, cover it up, because every time you feed them, you wanna keep adding that 2-inch layer of paper on the top of the wet paper so that you keep the smells out and that they are protected. So just feed the one side and they will eventually migrate over. It's not a foolproof method. It's not as easy as the double tray or triple tray or, you know, vertical way of doing it. It does work. You're going to have a lot more worms that are just still hanging out in the compost you want to harvest. But it is a way if you only want to do like single bin. And then once they mostly move over there, again, it might take 2 weeks to a month for that to happen. Then you can just scoop out that compost. And if you want to sort through with the worms, that's fine. Or if you just want to put it in a bucket and be like, I'm just going to use it as is. And then you can move and just start feeding the empty side. And then those other worms will move over and you can keep going back and forth with that direction. And just keep harvesting that way. I highly recommend at least doing 2 trays. So, and then once this tray is full, and typically they want to migrate upwards because they want to be at the top level. But I find even when this one gets full of compost, then you can do the same thing on the bottom one and they will move down into where the food is. So they won't go like 5 or 6 trays deep, but they will definitely go down 1 or 2 trays. And then they'll go eat that food and then you can harvest this and feed and go back and forth and back and forth. Does that help answer the harvesting question? And that's really like the basics of it, of composting, so of worm composting. So you want to make sure that it is a moist environment, that they always have a lot of moisture in there. You want to make sure that you have plenty of paper, leaves, or paper towels. At Green Mountain Compost, they use paper towels because they typically come in with compost up to their shoulders. So they wash their whole arms off and then they use like paper towels. So I go over and I steal those as well and use those in my worm composting because it's just water, no big deal. So they can definitely and some classrooms have compost or towel collection anyway, paper towel collection. So you can use those, shred them up. That works great. Or you can just use leaves. Using outside leaves brings in other critters too, and sometimes unwanted ones like centipedes and beetles and things because they like lay eggs or they've got they're hibernating or whatever. And so those will kill your worms. There are critters in there that you don't want in there, but springtails, like I'll show you my my operation over here. You can see. Oh, there we go. All right. So this bad boy is the urban worm bag, and it's probably about like 30 some pounds of compost in it right now. And I just set that up probably 2 months ago. And then here's the worm factory. And then here's like a homemade bin. So I've got, all sorts of levels going on here. So with this urban worm bag, it's kind of cool because you harvest from the bottom, which I haven't tried yet, but we'll be doing that sometime in the very near future. And so they just keep moving up to where the food is and you just keep feeding it. And it's kind of like the bucket method, only a lot more expensive. And it is expensive, but it's like, it's pretty awesome and pretty easy to set up and use. And I'm liking the convenience of it so far. But yeah,
Rhonda, you've got various questions coming in and some amusing commentary going on as well.
All right, we got 7 minutes.
All right, so Suzanne says, yes, our tiny shoebox size bin worked very well. We also had a pair of scissors nearby to snip the snack leftovers into small pieces. I would ask my families to send us any black plastic bins from frozen meals. They could use them for STEM challenges.
Yeah, excellent.
And Kate asks, is there a way to use mosquito net or similar to allow airflow but prevent escape? We are an after-school program and share a space, and I don't think the library would be okay with even the possibility of escaped worms in the morning.
Yeah, so you can, I can understand that.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely try it out. And if you can, snap some pictures of your setup and send them to me because I'm always looking for, like, I really truly want to see everybody's different setups. But yeah, give it a go. Definitely. If they want to escape. And again, it's not always an issue for people, but it can be. Just keep them nice and moist. That's where I see like the most, like every time I get a call about the escaping worms, it's typically because it's like not moist enough. So I would have the kids be checking on the worms every day just to get an idea of like how quick does it dry out. I do find that the worm factory thingy stays really moist, and that the multi-bin system tends to hold in a lot more moisture than just a single one. And when you get your lid, and you're always gonna have a lid on the top too. I'm like thinking you guys could see that. So you're always gonna have a lid on the top. I used to drill holes on the lid. I don't anymore. I just leave these holes around because I feel like it's too much air circulation and it dries them out too quickly. So when I set it up for schools now, I usually just do the ones around the side, and it seems to work pretty well. But definitely just make sure that if you do the 2 inches of newspaper or 2 inches of any sort of paper that's soaked in water for at least 10 minutes, again, overnight is preferable, or I find that preferable, then you probably will not run into drying out issues in between feedings. And again, once a week is plenty. And worms can eat up to half their weight in food scraps. So if you've got a half a pound of worm a day. So if you got a half a pound of worms, they can eat a quarter pound every single day. So you can just collect that. If they're optimal, if their ecosystem is at optimal working conditions.
And James asks about that. He says, is there a way to gauge feeding frequency? Can I accidentally feed too much or too little?
You can definitely feed too much. The bedding will always provide food for them. So you don't have to worry about feeding them too little unless like you're going on vacation or something for like 2 weeks. But I've left my worms for 2 weeks and they've been fine. I gave them a nice healthy dose of food before I left, but like they were fine and they had plenty of paper to eat. But you can't overfeed them. And so again, like depending on your situation and your worms, I would start off small and see what they eat. I'd feed maybe even a quarter of the weight of what, or an eighth or something of the weight of worms that you have. And if you don't know, just throw in some pieces and see how long it takes them to eat it. And that's another good experiment. And also figuring out what they do and do not like. So the kids can actually bury the food at different spots and then like mark it with like a little flag or a little popsicle stick, and then check it a week later and see which food is eaten. But I can guarantee you the melon will go in no time.
Someone has, Abby has asked whether you can talk about what to do over the summer when teachers might not be at the school. Someone else points out that, Suzanne points out that there are after school programs that might be willing to care for them. What else do you suggest, Rhonda?
I would suggest take them home. Come on, guys. Take them home. No, but if you want, I am always happy to be the summer attendant for worms. I've got plenty of schools that set it up during the school year, and then I come and collect them at the end of the school year, and then they just go back into the population, and then we kind of start all over again with the next school year. So that's always an option too. I have to take care of a bunch anyway, so I'm happy to. They probably will get dumped into the existing worm colonies, farms that I have, but I'm happy to do that as well. Aside from that, taking them home or the after school program is a great idea.
What a deal though. You're offering free worm babysitting.
I am.
What a deal.
I love it so.
Patty asked whether you can keep them outside anytime or should you not?
You probably should not, because our weather is, all over the place. They can't survive at all below freezing or below 35. They aren't going to do much from 35 to 60 degrees. They're not going to compost much. They might live, but they're not going to do much work. Between 60 and 75 is optimal. But if you put them outside, you need to make sure that it's not going to get above 75 or fall below 60 at any time during the day, and that they're not in like the sunlight where the bin's going to heat up. I just find it's a lot easier to keep them inside. They, I lived with roommates that were not thrilled that I had a big worm farm, but they were like, oh, I didn't even know it was there. And so people have slept they used to be in my bedroom when I had roommates. I kept them in my bedroom and people would like sleep in my room and be like, oh my God, please tell me that black thing is not what I think it is. And I'm like, you didn't even know they were there. So don't worry about it. And it's not for everybody to be indoors, but they are just not going to survive here unless you have like maybe a heated garage or something over the winter time. They just, unfortunately.
And
but you can think of designing something maybe with heaters.
One more question for you. I know we're getting here at 7, but Kristen is asking about concern about introducing worms from your bin to the ecosystem outside? Should you be trying to kill any remaining worms before putting your castings outside?
That is a great question. And that's, yeah, that's a superb question. It's something that I struggled with when I started worm composting. Like, oh my gosh, well, I can't pick them all out and I can't find like all of the cocoons, so they could be hatching. The red wigglers do not pose a threat here in Vermont to our ecosystem, to our native ecosystem, because they don't typically survive the winters. You will find them. I mean, obviously you'll find them in your compost pile and such. You will, and on farms, because they can overwinter in the warm manure that's breaking down as well. They do love manure a lot. Some areas call them manure worms and not red wigglers. So they do survive, but they are not a huge threat to generally to our ecosystem, because they are going to die. With that said, I always try to pick it clean as I can. I know that some make it out into my garden, but I have never dug up my garden and found red wigglers in my garden. So yeah, there's a fine balance there. You know, after doing a lot of reading about the invasive worms that we do have here in earthworms, they are definitely on a list. They've been spotted once on worm hunts in Vermont, or twice, but they're not necessarily found every time they go canvass to see what species of worms are here. They just have been detected in Vermont. So I don't think that they are much of a threat to, or they're not much of a threat to our ecosystem. But great question. But it's a great lead into invasives. Oh, before you go, I forgot all about this. Holy bananas. This is gonna be a link as well. So for like middle school and high school, this is like one of my favorite books, and my 10th grade bio kids like loved this. They hated me because I was like a substitute, but they loved this book, and I got like kudo fun points from them reading it. But it's Gary Larson from The Far Side, and it talks about all sorts of things. It talks about invasives, ecosystems, human impacts. It's a fantastic book. I found a PDF of it. I don't know how legal this is, but I found a PDF of it on the Googles. And so I did include that into the resource folder for you guys. So, and a worksheet that goes with it as well. But I would highly recommend adding that to your library list, because it is a fantastic book. I love it. Like, I read it myself a lot. But any other questions?
Yes. A reminder, please remind us where we can get worms.
Ooh. So when I send you the link to the resource folder, in there will be a guide to composting with worms in your classroom. At the end of the last page of that has, I think, 4 resources for worms that you can order them by the poundage. Again, they are really expensive right now. Typically, they're about $35 shipped. You don't want to ship them now, obviously, so you'll want to wait till May. I always wait till May, May through September. Probably not July anymore, because, well, they're stinking hot these days. But so I usually order them in April or May from these guys, but they are expensive. If you want worms, email me. I will give you a handful. And like I said, in 60 days, there will be new worms flying around, or not flying, crawling around your bin. So it does not take very long for them to get a good population going, if they're happy. I order from Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. I think he has like exquisite worms.
You heard it here. Endorsement of Uncle Jim's Worms.
Uncle Jim. Anything else?
No other questions.
All right. Well, thanks for hanging in there, guys. I miss you so much. I cannot wait to get back working with you guys. Thank you for all you've done through this whole pandemic and before that, but I know that this is, not ideal for you guys either. So thank you for being amazing. And thank you for teaching me how to be a better teacher as well. So I've learned a lot from all of you over the years. And I hope to do another one of these, maybe on some trash talking next month. If you're interested, let me know in the feedback form that you'll be getting a link to. Just like be like, yeah, we would love more of these things if it was useful. But be honest too, because if it's not useful, then I don't want to waste your time. But it was great that you guys could join us. So have a great night. Happy Thursday.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.